revenues, and lessening system barriers to community inclusion and participation for everyone. So in terms of our key recommendations, we feel that we need to work on all of these things in order to be able to create an efficient transportation system. Not completing these projects, which we've heard from several, right now with the provincial election, we've had certain groups say that perhaps we won't complete these projects. But those are false savings. If we don't complete them, what will happen is that we'll have other economic impacts further down the road. And those economic impacts will affect us in many, many other ways. So gridlock affects the economy. It affects us in terms of lost productivity. It'll help drive business away, and it also affects our lifestyle. So this is a nonpartisan issue. No matter what government is in play, we think that these things still have to be addressed.
So I think now we'll move to kind of the question and answer section. So for those of you who are sitting at the table, you can press the talk button and you can address those. Do you have any questions around the table?
Yes. Hello? Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Yes, my name is Steve Kerr. I'm representing Brampton as a candidate in wards 1 and 5. Just wanted to know if you looked at anything with the magnetic levitation.
Not specifically.
Maglev. Yeah. Did you do any report or anything?
Maglev's a very interesting technology. I mean, usually it's used on larger, or I should say longer distance commutes. So yeah, I think there was an idea floated by Glenn Murray that there was a possibility of a high-speed train to go from London to Toronto. I don't know if they specifically looked at maglev to make that a high-speed train, but that was one thing I think that's out there. Generally, you wouldn't have it within like city limits, but it is quite an impressive technology, and it is something if you wanted to plan a longer distance railroad that you definitely should look at. Sorry.
Thanks very much, Steve Mahoney, and congratulations to the task force, and thank you for this extremely important work. And forgive me for not having read the entire report. Just going based on your presentation, one of the difficulties, I speak in terms of the situation in Mississauga, and I do agree we need to look across the entire region, but it's the amount of money that's funded out of the fare box versus the taxpayer. Currently it's 43 cents out of Mississauga Transit's fare box, 57 out of the taxpayer. Have you looked at the issue of density in terms of users, given that if we want it's a little bit of a chicken or egg, if we want to have more transit, we need more users so that we can control the cost, and if we need more users, I'm sure this must have come up in the speakers section when you had the gentleman from Toronto from the media talking about urban sprawl. We read his comments in the paper all the time criticizing our fair city, but we do need greater density and more people available to use this transit, and I wonder if you've made a recommendation on that.
Yeah, I think we did look at some of that. I think it's very interesting. I think the density issue, you've got things like the Places to Grow Act, which came in the mid-2000s. It's become more obvious that that is something that has to happen. As you say, it's kind of a chicken and egg. I think one of the things you can see is very poorly planned transit, like, for instance, the Shepherd subway. Last I heard that for every $2.75 when somebody taps onto the Shepherd subway, there's about $17 in subsidies to keep that going. So that's a very poorly planned transit. I think you do need to kind of think of, I think Sonia maybe can speak to this as well, but some kind of a grid system where you have your major arteries being your major transit roads. I mean, you're not going to have a bus going every 5 minutes down some small road, right? That's not the point. The point is you want to have at least the minimum level of connectivity so that you can encourage users to want to take it in the first place. I think in Mississauga, Wendy Alexander from the Transit Department was one of our presenters as well. She did a great presentation, which I think she also made to council. And she mentioned that the usage of Mississauga Transit has gone up at almost exactly the same rate as the population. So although we're getting more riders onto transit, it's just by virtue of the population increase, not because we're encouraging more riders. So I think, as we get density, you're right, it has to be something that drives it. And I think on the Huron-Ontario line, I think that would be something where that's where you put in your density, right? You don't want every single place in Mississauga to go from a bedroom community to a high density, lofts built everywhere kind of thing. That's not what we would encourage, and I don't think that's the vision of Mississauga City Council either. My impression is they want to change that 5% of the city to make that more dense and have the appropriate transit to support that.
No, yeah, I think you've answered it correctly. I think it's many municipalities, or a lot of municipalities across the GTA are grappling with this issue, and it's about creating that appropriate balance between density and what citizens are willing to live in. And again, what you mentioned is such an egg conundrum where what do you do first? Do you build it? Will they come? And it's something that politicians will have to decide on what decisions that need to take place. So I think we'll have to take it step by step, and I think you've described it accurately.
I think one of the lessons of the Shepherd line though was that, when they built it, there weren't still those high-rise apartments that they now have up there. And even with all that density that's got built up in the last 15 years or so that the subway line's been on, it's still not making an impact. It's still not dense enough to justify that line. So definitely, building it and they will come, yes, but you already have to have at least something there in the first place, I think. So I think the best lines have been where you take an existing line that is starting to get to capacity and graduate it to the next level of transit. Take that bus route and move it to a BRT, move it from BRT to an LRT, and eventually someday you'll dig a subway in Mississauga, but it'll be a long time. Jackie's one of our members from our committee.
If I just may add, Vaughan has come up with a fairly good model of that, and you can take a look at their planning. They've built their transitways in advance, and they've planned them in advance of their density, and they're encouraging all their development around those transitways well in advance. So it's a well thought out plan where you've got densities around transitways as the major attractor. So we can look at that.
One other thing I'd mention too is Marilyn Morrison, the mayor of Caledon, actually sent me a note saying she wished she could be here tonight, but she actually had a hip replacement. And she is interested in meeting with us at a future date. But I know one of the things a year ago when she came to the summit was she said, my population is going to go something from 50,000 to 500,000 or some astronomical increase like that. And she's saying, right now I have no 401 series highway, I have no GO train stops within my jurisdiction. I'm supposed to be planning this all the way out, and yet I'm not kind of getting that support. So I think they're in a different point than Mississauga, obviously. But it shows you do have to plan far in advance as much as you can. And stick to that plan, because I think one of the challenges is councils anywhere can set a plan, and then when it comes to the NIMBYism of I don't want that apartment building in my backyard, even if it was on the books for the last 30 years to go there, it's tough for council to stand strong and say, it's on the plan, this is what was agreed to, you should have known that when you bought. It's tough to say to those people.
Hi there.
Hi.
My name is Chris Drew, and I'm one of the co-founders of a new citizens group in Brampton called Fight Gridlock in Brampton. And we just want to say that we officially endorse and think this report and the work of the summit is fantastic. And we hope to collaborate with you. We're very new, so we're happy to be here. And the reason our group formed is specifically to promote rapid transit in Brampton, complete streets, and also specifically to support the Huron-Ontario main LRT, including the alignment on Main Street, where a group of residents that support LRT on Main Street want to see it built. And I just want to really quickly say that it's fantastic that we're all gathered here. And what our group looks to do is build resident support for rapid transit, specifically in Brampton. And Brampton, it's important to point out, has some unique challenges. You may have heard some talk about how easy it might be seemingly to expand the GO train network. In Brampton, unlike Mississauga, CN Rail actually owns the track going right through the heart of downtown Brampton, and that is their main line for Canada. And it would be very difficult, beyond the existing improvements underway, to expand that without some serious negotiations and hundreds of millions of dollars of capital investment, none of which has an environmental assessment. So individuals who claim that we should cancel LRT lines and replace it with expanding a GO train network clearly have not spoken to civil engineers. And so our group points out that let's build something now as quickly as possible. No more delays. We want action. We want rapid transit in Brampton and Mississauga. And we will be that strong residents' voice that will grow. We're very new, but we look forward to being a very powerful force that will speak up for residents in Brampton who want rapid transit, LRT, complete streets, and also more GO train service, but of course respecting the advice of our civil engineers.
And that's exactly what this is about as well. Thank you. Because this is a residents group exactly formed along the same lines in that we wanted to advocate for what we wanted to see here in transportation. The focus has too long been in Toronto, and the Western GTA has needs. We all felt as residents we had needs as well, and it's being able to be that resident's voice. When we had Wendy Alexander, the Director of Transportation for the City of Mississauga, come speak to us, she said she relies on other groups to be able to push for those things. They can make recommendations as planners for what they see as good things to have, but having the residents say, we want this, and to be able to push that through on the agendas is really important for them to have that backup.
I'd specifically say too, if you go into the report, it wasn't kind of mentioned as much as it could be today, but on the LRT, and I think the two-way GO train traffic, I think these are transformational for Brampton and Mississauga in particular. I think that it will reorient the way that we start thinking about our cities. A lot of people, when we talk about downtown, we mean Toronto. We don't really think about downtown Mississauga a lot of times. We don't think about downtown Brampton because so many people commute to Toronto. I think when we have two-way GO train traffic, when we have the LRT, that's one more piece of the puzzle that will make us think of our own economic and social kind of sphere of influence or orbit that will change our mentalities over time. If you go back and look at the pictures of Yonge Street before they put in the subway, when they just had the LRT equivalents going up and down there, it looks remarkably similar to what here Ontario looks today. If you fast forward 40 or 50 years, it's very conceivable we could be digging our own subway and having our own sphere of influence.
Just a point on that.
James?
We had somebody, I think it was the director of Mississauga Transit, say to us that that's right, when the Bloor Street subway was constructed in the old metropolitan Toronto, they had approximately the same population as the Western GTA does now. And there isn't an LRT or a subway or the equivalent in the Western GTA.
And we're growing.
Yeah, we'll take our turns. I'm Don McVie. Aside from being publisher of Spirit of the City, I'm a co-chair on the LIVE task force. So I do want to compliment you guys over here in the MOVE who work so hard. And but I'd like to observe that the process, we talk a lot about mass transit and higher order transit, but in places where transit works, it's a part of accepting a lifestyle. And I've come to realize that every time we speak of intensification, we don't have to be talking about towers. There are places for towers. But it is about a commitment to a higher level of density on all of the arterials. And we look at a city like Mississauga that's been criticized, and yet, you know, I was here when the city was formed, and I briefly worked for Mississauga Transit, and I know we were running transit in Meadowvale before people even moved in. So it's not like the city never paid attention, but the culture has slipped. The NIMBYism is way more dangerous than just the term implies. Unless we make an aggressive effort to allow people to better understand what is inevitable, that we will live and we will work and we will recreate closer, we will shop. The future looking forward, it's an inevitability or we fail. So one of the things you put that I read in your recommendations, and I think it has to be very much underscored collectively and in each locale, we have to do the job of making people understand that this is This is not just about subways. We're scaring people off, and we have to talk about transit and pedestrian-friendly changes. And if that includes Gil Penaloza's bike lanes with simple stanchions to open them up, the sooner we make the changes, the sooner that the younger generation and the people who are ready to be acclimatized to this will jump in.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, if anyone who's traveled to Europe knows that most of Europe is a very dense place, and they do it with 3- and 4-story buildings. They don't do it in skyscrapers. Bonnie Crombie?
Thank you all. And let me just say thank you for the incredible work that you have done. I think it's terrific that you have outlined things at a high level. You've tackled pricing strategy, which was great. Good information on governance, good recommendations on better coordination and amalgamation all around. I think we're all here because we agree that congestion and gridlock are the key issues that are affecting our productivity and our prosperity. And the goal is, in our region, to build that integrated transit system. So we don't want to talk in isolation. We don't want to talk in silos. I think Steve made a good point when we talked about the pressure on a city for full cost recovery. And there is that pressure. We only have 43 cents going into the cash box. Yet that's only operating revenue. That doesn't even speak to capital. So, you know, you haven't tackled the issue of how we're going to fund it, but that is something we do have to grapple with. You talked about affordability versus fairness. It's something we need to think a lot about. I'd like to hear more about the affordable transit pass that they have in Hamilton. As a matter of fact, I don't know how that works. We know it's a very fine balance between price and service, service levels. I think what we're also seeing, what Don just touched on, is that innate tension between drivers, cars, and transit riders. And we saw that, and we saw one of the provincial leaders pitting drivers against transit riders, and we don't want to have that. So going forward, how we fund it is an issue. I'm not going to ask you for your recommendation, but I'm going to ask you how you would prioritize in the event that limited funds are available. Would we invest as a region, as a city, in all-day two-way electrified GO, increase our service so that we can go back and forth seamlessly to downtown Toronto, right to the airport, right here to Mississauga, Brampton, Caledon, etc., or would we really fight and push for our LRT, not only north-south, but eventually east-west, and continuing the corridors of the BRT and the rest of our MyWay transit system? Have you thought about how you would prioritize should that need arise?
Well, first I actually would say one of the recommendations when we get more into the details is we've called for a much larger role for the federal government. I think, frankly, the provincial government has been far more forthcoming with resources in the last few years. The federal government, as I mentioned, lumps in transportation with general infrastructure, which could be hydro jams or environmental causes. It does not dedicate to transit. Our specific recommendation in the report is to take all of the gas tax money, which is about $5 billion a year, and to dedicate that to capital costs of transit projects, which would give it a dedicated revenue stream. I think that would significantly increase the federal government's share of those capital costs for the upfront building of the projects. It doesn't help you on the fare box recovery, because of course that's more run by the municipalities. I don't think we've actually come to, I don't know if I want to go out on a limb and
It hasn't been part of your discussion. I mean, the bottom line is we want our fair share for Mississauga, for GTA West.
Yes.
Certainly, we did see the federal government step up with $660 million for a very ineffective and inefficient subway to Scarborough. Not that we begrudge them their subway, but nonetheless, we just want our fair share. I just wanted to say to Steve Kerr here, the cost of the LRT is $1.6 billion. It would be 4 times the cost elevated into the monorail system to get it off the ground, as you had talked about, 7 times the cost to bury it and tunnel it to become a subway. That's the economics of that.
And we're really pleased to see, like, for example, the budget that was presented on May 1st, that there was actual funding dedicated to the GTHA versus the rest of the province, $15 billion towards the GTHA. And we're hoping that subsequent government would still follow that line so that we have that portion. It just shows that there is more importance that this region is being shown.
Catherine Soplet. I'm a member of Peel Poverty Action Group. Thank you so much for preparing this report, and from the voices of people who are marginalized. Thank you for thinking about people who have affordability issues. In terms of planning, we need to remember that 80% of people who are on affordable housing rolls are families, and families who are on affordable housing rolls need to be able to walk to transit, to shopping, to schools, and to healthcare. And that needs to be formulated in terms of clusters of people gathering as densities in residence as opposed to densities for business. And with respect to affordability, establishing a fair holiday. If we had fair holidays on voting days and everybody who is marginalized could get to the polls, what kind of message would that send to the federal government?
And in the report, you'll see that we do mention fair holidays, and it's a recommendation that we have.
Yeah, I think one other thing I'd mention is, CAA has said that the average cost to maintain a car in the GTA is $10,000 to $11,000, a significant cost for a family. If we can provide good transit for a middle-class family and they can go down from 2 cars to 1 car, $10,000 savings, that's your retirement fund for a year. That's a significant thing. That's more than just going to Disney. When you plan that out, it's going to hit their pocketbooks in a really positive way if they can make that downsize from 2 cars to 1 car. That's a significant savings, and I think that would really benefit people's socioeconomics. The other thing I'd say is people who have greater than an 80-minute commute are 50% more likely to divorce. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but there's statistics in the report about employee turnover being drastically higher when they have longer commutes. So it's a business cost. When you turn over an employee, that's somebody. As an employer myself, as somebody who manages people, I lost one employee in downtown Toronto who relocated to Citigroup on here, Ontario, because she was tired of coming into downtown Toronto. It was my loss and Citigroup's gain.
Yes, my name is Paul Vicente from Brampton. Those of us who spend a lot of time thinking about transit, we understand its importance, but sometimes when you're talking to people, the public, you do get the sense that it's their car or our transit system, and they're not, they can't coexist together. How can we work to get more buy-in from the public? Because after all, they're the ones who pay for this.
Yep. I think one of the best things I've heard is somebody who many of you know will tell this story about being in Oakville, and somebody who drives a Jaguar to their investment banking job downtown will say, I don't care what kind of transit you build, I will never get on a GO train until the day I die. And the thing is, the person replied back, well, it's not about you, it's about freeing up the 10 cars that are in front of you on the road so that you can actually drive yourself down there. So, you know what? Not everyone's going to hop on a bus. Not everyone's going to hop on a GO train or an LRT. And they don't have to. We just need to get enough cars off the road, 10-15%. If you look at London, when they put in the restrictions around central London or Stockholm, same thing. They only reduced the number of cars 10 or 15%, but the impact on travel times was huge. That 10% just made such a huge difference. If you can put that to people in that kind of way, I think they will buy in more, even if they never hop on that GO train or that bus.
Joe, it's about giving people options.
You're right, and that's the thing too, and I think a couple of people have raised that some people don't have cars, it's not an option. Jordan, who's a wonderful member of our committee, who's a high school student, can tell you, he's come to a lot of our meetings on Mississauga Transit.
Well, as a student, students have, really they're not licensed, and transit is their only viable alternative to get around. If making transit more affordable and more seamless to travel from point A to get to point B, so a student can get to a part-time job, can get to school, and as well so they can work, learn, and play all while moving seamlessly and without it costing them an arm and a leg to get there. That is an essential component of transit, and that is how we move transit forward in Ontario.
I think one of the things that we address in our report is the beauty of the system and making the system attractive and marketing that system so that not just the people that the Jag driver isn't subject to, but you know, people get an idea, get a sense that this is not the loser cruiser of the past. That transit is a viable alternative that often will get you where you want to go faster.
Okay, maybe we'll just have a couple more questions and
Joe.
wrap up.
Joe, I just have, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, just at the back there?
I have a loud voice. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name's Juanita. I'm a recent university graduate from York University, and I also used to work downtown with Rogers and them at Bay in college. So one of those people who used to say, I've never taken GO transit, and used to commute 2 hours each way going downtown to come back home, and I had a child to come back home to. By the time I got back home, dinner, it would be past dinner time, my mother would have to do everything. Couldn't really be a full-time parent because I always had to commute, and by the time I got home, my daughter was ready for bed. So it's something we don't like, but it was really inconvenient taking the GO. Now the GO's improved, where I changed my mind and I've taken it a lot to go downtown or to go to school, but then when it comes to the next problem, weekends or after rush hour, that's a problem. Sometimes when I had to write exams, I had to go to school on a Sunday, the GO transit's stuck, and I would just choose to drive my B6 engine car to York University. When I had to go take the Greyhound or run to the airport and I'm running late, I would have loved to take the transit and save money, but I ended up paying airport parking or parking downtown, so I'm only away for a little short time period, like a weekend. But if the transit was running frequently, I would definitely take the transit versus my car and paying parking like $20 a day. So, you know, sometimes it's about convenience and frequency, and during the off-time hours that most of us would like. And even the Presto card is good for household incomes with low income. Even when I finished school and I had money on it, I gave my card to my daughter so she could use it. So it can be passed around the house and use it. So, you know, there's ways to go about it. But I found when I was in Washington, they had a great system where they went by distance. I don't know if it's convenient for us, but in Washington, it really, if I know I'm only going a couple of stops on the subway, why should I pay the same price going from Mississauga to Scarborough, you know? So maybe that's something, I don't know if people look at it.
It is one of the recommendations,
Yeah.
at looking at distance.
But they have, I thought that was a pretty fair system that they used.
Yeah, distance and time as a measure of how to cost for transit is popular in many international jurisdictions, and I think it's something GO should pay more attention to.
Joe, I just want to say that one of the things I've noticed with issues like this, and it's true of many other things, is that when we get a group like this together, we tend to sing to the choir. Everybody's on the same page, everybody's supporting the concept, you know. I doubt that there's too many issues in transit, Bonnie, that you and I will ever disagree on. I think we want to get the same thing done. But, you know, I go back to this issue that our biggest challenge as a community, when we see the debate that goes on in Toronto where they're on again, off again, on again, off again, you know, the lack of discipline and the political gridlock that occurs long before the transportation gridlock occurs is very frustrating. And then you see all the federal dollars going to, really for partisan purposes, to build a subway. But what we really need to do as a society, as a community in the Western GTA, is to take it beyond those of us in the choir who believe and convince people. And by the way, it's no longer called NIMBY, it's now called banana. And it means you can't build anything near anyone nor or you can't build near anyone nor anything. Okay, so it's the new phrase is banana. And we just need to get people to realize that we're not talking about building huge skyscrapers in their backyards. We got to respect neighborhoods. But Eglinton Avenue across from the hospital and across from the mall was zoned back when I was on council, for goodness sakes. And all of a sudden people say, what are you doing building that? And my wife Katie's had to go and explain it to people. Where else would you build high-rise other than on Eglinton Avenue at the intersection of those two major streets? And we have to start seeing that develop on Dundas Street in areas where it makes sense, where people are going to be available to use the transit, near affordable homes, where people can get out and not have to walk 20 minutes. The Lakeview plan that I saw presented was absolutely spectacular. 300 people at a meeting at the Carmen Corbison Senior Center, and it almost got a standing ovation. It had transit running right through the heart of it. Nobody had to walk more than 5 minutes to get to a transit stop. That's the kind of thinking and future development, frankly, we need. And I'm not saying this politically, regardless of who is in office in this city. It's the citizens like you guys, the choir, that's got to take this message out to people. The politicians can't